And welcome to our monthly webinar series where we will present a variety of topics that directly influence your business. My name is Charles. I am Director of Business Development at iTernal Networks. Here at iTernal Networks, our goal is to provide a reliable and secure IT environment so that our clients can focus on running their businesses. As a heads up, we are muting everyone for the purpose of today's webinar, but we do enjoy your participation in the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. There will be a raffle during our discussion, so please stay tuned for the entirety of the webinar. I'm pretty excited about this panel discussion. We have been discussing putting this together for months. Today we are joined by a group of experts who represent the best of the best. We have partnered with them to provide a multi-layered cybersecurity and a risk management solution that allows us to better serve our clients. Allow me to really quickly introduce our panelists and then our host. So in no particular order, we have Dave Fore with Sophos, the industry leader in cybersecurity. Next, we have Kneas with Kaseya. She works with their dark web monitoring and compliance management solutions. We are also joined by Andy Anderson with Datastream, who we have partnered with to provide cybersecurity insurance. And of course, we have Des Thomas with Datto, who is our partner in business continuity and disaster recovery. Today's host is Michael Cannett, who you guys probably are familiar with. He's the founder of iTernal Networks. So once again, I do want to encourage you all as our audience to comment and ask any questions that you might have. We will be responding to them during the course of the discussion. And if we aren't able to get to all the questions within the allotted hour, then we will follow up some emails afterwards. So Mike, it's all yours.
Thanks, Charles. So Charles mentioned we've been planning this for months. So at the very beginning of the year, when we were looking at our webinar, our monthly webinars and which topics, our marketing person at the time said, "Hey, in September, let's do a panel. It's draft time for fantasy football. So who would we draft to be on our team, right?" And so we quickly identified the vendors that we work with for cybersecurity for our panel. And we're super excited to have everybody here that it worked with everybody's schedule. To start off today, I want to kind of give you guys the overall direction of that we're going to be going with our conversation here with these experts in their fields. And to do that, I want to talk a little bit about the NIST cybersecurity framework. So NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and they have built and put together a cybersecurity framework that essentially it's an outline that businesses can follow to increase their cyber resilience or cyber security. And it's designed, it kind of seems like it's step by step, but it's really designed to all be done at the same time once it's fully implemented. So, the different areas are to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And as small businesses implement this cybersecurity framework, they can, better improve their cyber resilience. So we're kind of going to be going through, starting with identify the different areas and asking some questions specific to those areas of this framework. And if you're not familiar with the NIST framework, you can go to nist.gov and find out more information on it. And I wanted to start off by asking Kim, why is it important for a business to align with a framework for cybersecurity such as NIST?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, right? We get asked a lot, where do I start? How do I know kind of where I need to focus? I've got limited resources, limited budget, limited time. So I think, when there's a framework that we can follow, it kind of sets forward that path that everybody can follow, make sure they're doing the best practices. In this case, as you mentioned, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, that non-regulatory government agency, they're there to help businesses, help put together the resources when it comes to technological advancement and security. So, they developed this framework, this cybersecurity framework, to really help businesses streamline cybersecurity. That is what it is intended for. So it's really a set of voluntary standards and best practices, recommendations, suggestions that are absolutely designed to help businesses be better prepared for, as you outlined, preventing, identifying, detecting, responding to, and then of course recovering from cyber attacks. We know that the threat landscape is expanding, the threat vectors, attack vectors are expanding. Everything is getting much more prevalent, much more sophisticated. So following a framework like this is a great opportunity for organizations to really ensure that they are focusing in on those practices, controls, things that they can do to make sure that they have the best security posture possible. And I think it's really important to note that this represents what you put up, that graphic, when we talk about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That really represents the complete security life cycle, right? And so it's really going to help guide decisions and policies and controls to make sure that organizations really are putting in place the most well-rounded security posture, and that they're better prepared to handle those cybersecurity threats. I think when I'm talking about a framework such as this, when we're talking about cybersecurity and compliance with a framework such as this, I think it's important, there's the protecting the business, but then there's also that trust piece, right? Trust is absolutely essential in driving those business relationships and successes. So, adding this framework, such as the NIST CSF framework, to a cybersecurity program, I think can really help kind of nurture that client confidence in the organization, and then of course enhance the reputation, so much so that it almost becomes an added benefit, right? You are perceived as that trusted vendor, supplier, partner that can really help you stand out from competition and hopefully generate revenues, so that it's not just a cost or a burden, but really an added benefit to the organization as well.
Thanks, Kim. Does anybody else have anything to add to the importance of a framework such as this?
Everything Kim just said was completely perfect. Totally agree with that. The only thing that I would just want to add to that, in your conversations, the reason why using frameworks like this is good is it helps it see as more of a resilience plan than a one and done. It's not just this, you just bought that product and we had that sort of security conversation. You know what, you're good. That's it. That's all. We're good. And so that way, when you have to go back to your clients, when you have to go revisit that conversation and be like, you know what, there is a new threat out there. We need to keep on this conversation and talk about resiliency and how, when you get hit, if you get hit, that you're actually able to get back up and recover at any point in time. So definitely one of the reasons why those frameworks are so good.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the NIST framework, if you read the documentation on it, it's not a step-by-step. It's designed that once you're fully implemented, you're doing all the steps all the time, because there's always going to be a new threat, a new risk to your business. And having that framework in place that you can then say, okay, well, here management team, now there's this, what do we do? And you follow through your framework and develop the policies and procedures for your organization. And sometimes it means a new vendor, a new product, a new service. Sometimes it just means tweaking what you've got there. And Des, you kind of answered my next question, which was going to be about a cyber resilience plan. And I think what you said is exactly perfect. Is there are multiple layers, multiple things, and they all interact together, and you need to be applying them and analyzing them within the framework. All right, if nobody has any other questions, let's move on to the identify section. So from the framework, this is probably the starting point in applying the NIST framework to your organization is identifying your threats. And sometimes, Dave, this will be a question for you, but talking with other small businesses, sometimes I hear them say that they're not concerned about being attacked, right? It's like, oh, I'm too small. I'm not one of those industries that's really a target. I'm not really concerned about adding all of this cybersecurity because I don't have the risk. So why is that a false assumption in today's landscape?
You hear it, I hear it. I think we all hear it all the time. The reason is because of that mindset. Honestly, is a big part of it. Is that the bad guys know that small businesses, this applies to, K-12 schools that I deal with as well, who think we're not Colonial Pipeline. We don't control the gas supply for the entire eastern seaboard of the US. We're not Target, we're not Home Depot. The news cycle throws out the big names that we all know and then impact all of us because we all shop there, right? Or the things that are going to impact the ability to get gasoline on a daily basis. But they don't report on all the little folks that are being hit, all the smaller companies that are being hit. And the fact of the matter is, in the old days, we're talking small numbers of years here, not decades. In the old days, those very targeted attacks against large, big name companies that make the news cycle were very customized and like I said, targeted, and they used very specific techniques. And just like everything else in technology, the bad guys have gotten really good at automating their tools, techniques, and tactics to go after the small guys. Now they've made it so they can take what they did with a target 5 years ago, and they can kind of automate that and kind of turn it into a tool set that they can frankly sell on the dark web. And I think Des or somebody on the panel is an expert there, right? And they can sell that to aspiring young bad guys who can then go plug in their information to attack the segments they want to go after. And frankly, the bad guys know that the mindset exists in small business that we're not a target, so we don't need to do all those things, which actually makes you a softer target and easier to attack. So that it's a self-feeding bad attitude, bad mindset that gets a lot of small businesses in more trouble than they would have otherwise been in. And that's why it's so important when an iTernal Networks works with their customers, and when I have the opportunity to talk to any size customer, that we emphasize that just because you're not hearing about the 50-person company that ends up on the news, or I have an MSP partner who had a 6-person doctor's office get hit. And that 6-person's doctor's office, they had 6 computers and about 6 employees, and they got ransomed, all 6 of their computers. And it was as impactful to that doctor who couldn't see patients for 3 days before they got those machines recovered as Colonial Pipeline was to Colonial Pipeline's business. This is this doctor's livelihood, and by the way, 5 other employees' livelihood, and they couldn't see patients for 3 days, and it was impacting their patients, and it impacted their trust with their patients. That didn't make the news. It wasn't all over the news here in Phoenix, but it certainly was impactful to that person and to the partner that was helping them. So it is one of those things that we talk about all the time. Like, it doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter what line of work you're in. The goal isn't always stealing data today, by the way. It's not always about getting the stuff the secret info you have, because some people go, well, we don't really have a lot of sensitive info. It's not about that. It's about impacting you to the point that you can't do things, so you have to pay them to get out of hock. And that ransoming of those 6 computers, or in the case of Colonial Pipeline, whatever thousands it was for them, that's the same thing to you as it is to them, right? And from a business standpoint. So very important that everyone add the layers of protection needed to avoid those types of incidents within your own business.
Definitely. Thank you, Dave. Andy, I've got a kind of a follow-up question for you. Being that you're in the insurance business and cyber insurance in particular, you deal with minimizing risk, right, for, other businesses and protecting them and make sure. So why is it important for a business to identify their cybersecurity risk, and what are some things that they can do to properly identify that level of risk that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we hear too many sad stories in our business, right? Like, that's why we're in this business. It's just, small business after small business, whether that's a 6-person doctor's office, it's not news anymore. They end up involved in an incident that is often crushing to their business. So many end up going out of business or having to file for bankruptcy. And I think, just spending some time thinking through kind of what really is impactful for the business and what really matters, to touch on some of the topics that we've talked about. Resiliency, I think, as a small business, you realize that you you don't have the resources of a large company, but you actually have some advantages being a small business, actually, because you can be so flexible and so nimble. And so if at the outset you realize what really matters to your business, what are the systems that have to be up and running in almost real time, knowing that ahead of time, you can replicate, duplicate, create independent and redundant systems in many cases that are, almost in an hour or a few hours, you can put yourself in a very good position where you'll be able to ride out an incident in a way that once that incident has begun, you're sort of up a creek without a paddle kind of situation. And so that's what we, in the insurance industry, think through is how do folks think through not only the frequency of having an incident, like how likely are you to have that, but also the severity of it. When it happens, how do you make sure that it's something that's an unfortunate afternoon, not the worst thing that happened in your business life. And ultimately we see, insurance, as just it's another independent, very independent system relative to your others, right? So you have your redundancy in your IT systems, and then essentially a financial product on the insurance end of things, highly disconnected in some ways from what you're doing on the IT side. Although increasingly what we're seeing is that, understanding what you're doing on the IT side is going to drive the price of that insurance product, because, you want to make sure that it's done well. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So as they lower their cyber risk by implementing these layers and frameworks of, security, that'll directly impact their cyber insurance rate then?
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways the insurance industry, like it is in many places, is very good at giving people a perspective of measurement of how they're doing against those risk metrics. I mean, fortunately, if we're, when you buy auto insurance or fire insurance, you don't have to become an expert in, how to survive a car wreck. There's folks who crash dummies into walls and build airbags and all those sorts of things. And I think what we're starting to see from the insurance industry is that same sort of expert understanding across the disciplines between sort of the technology and the insurance industry to provide the end customer with some signs of what may actually work and not. And that's what, why we created Datastream, to help provide some of that additional connectivity and to rely on, a team of experts working together. And you can say, okay, together you're handling this issue and thinking about this in detail, so that I, small business owner, am not forced to do sort of a DIY assessment of all of these components, which in many cases they don't have the tools, the data, the experience that you would if you're an insurer with millions of customers, or technologists who do this every day, also dealing with thousands, if not millions of customers.
That's good. I appreciate that. I just want to take a second also to remind our audience, if any of you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to post those in the Q&A. We'd love to answer those as we go along. We'll also have some time at the very end to answer those questions. So Andy mentioned identifying, the proper systems, servers and resources internally that are critical to operations. And with more and more stuff moving to the cloud, does having these cloud-based systems decrease risk? Does having remote workers decrease risk? And what can be done to make sure business can still be maintained with these remote systems? Des, I know Datto has some services related to those cloud business continuity stuff. Is that something you could answer real quick?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I can say, the answer to that is yes. There is a huge amount of risk being a business owner, 100%. So any of you guys who are watching this, being a business owner, I understand why you have trouble sleeping at night, because it's a lot of stress. There's a lot of threats out there. And like we were talking about earlier, it's more often going to happen than not nowadays. And so now we used to think about it when everyone was in an office, you had to protect the office. So you had the VPNs and you had all the networks and security around that office. And then all of those 100 employees went to home, and they went and plugged in their Nest and their OK Googles and their Alexas and all their things. And they have their gaming systems, and their kids are on different systems and all of these things. And every one of those things opens up a new threat if you're not thinking about security as the first and foremost. We talk about security being like 3 steps. You need your peoples and your process and then your technology. So if your staff aren't necessarily thinking about security when they're at home, then they're definitely not secure, straight up. So some of the things to keep in mind when you're having those conversations is you need to be having a business continuity plan. If you're at home and the power goes out, do you have a system where you can keep up on the internet and keep working? If your kid comes into your house, or you're working in your house and your dog knocks over your computer and your computer smashes, well, can you keep working? And then of course, we talk about the threats like ransomware and stuff, which is scary and it happens a lot, but it's still a conversation we need to have. All of those threats are around us. You need to make sure that you have a plan in place that you can keep up and running. So whether that be using a solution provider like Datto, where we have that business continuity, so we can keep your business up and running. If your computer gets smashed, you can virtualize into the cloud. If you get hit with ransomware, you can roll back to a backup that's been tested, that works within, say, at the last hour you backed up, you can roll back to that version, and then it's like ransomware didn't hit your system in the first place. But in this environment that we're in, where we're seeing the supply chain attacks, these massive attacks, that making sure that you have that conversation with your vendors, this is why working with a managed service provider is so important right now, because the threats are evolving so quick that you don't necessarily know how you're actually protected.
Thanks. Kim, you deal with compliance management solutions. How does having remote workers and cloud systems affect businesses in maintaining their compliance?
Am I off mute?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I couldn't tell. Yeah, I think that's a big area that a lot of companies need to think about, because it does completely change the game when we are taking services, applications, people are accessing things at different times and on different systems, company related, on personal devices. I think it really opens up a whole separate set of issues as it relates to compliance, and particularly for those that are in highly regulated industries, how we're managing that data, the data governance, who's accessing it, how they're accessing it, where they're accessing it. It just is a whole other kind of set of concerns that we need to contend with and address as it relates to compliance. And there are tools out there. I know one of the things that we can help with, certainly through one of our tools, is not just running scans and addressing vulnerabilities and gaps on the network, but also on those folks that might be accessing systems on remote computers and maybe hiding some sensitive data, protected data on those machines that might leave them vulnerable. So I think it is not just when we think about all of the additional concerns related to security as we have that shift to remote workforce or even a hybrid workforce, but also the compliance issue as well. I think that's a whole other set of questions and concerns on that regard as well, for sure.
Thank you. And just for the audience, just a reminder, we've been talking about the identify stage of the NIST framework. So as we've been discussing these things, these are different areas that you need to properly identify within your organization of the level of risk and what you're comfortable with and what you can do to protect it, which is the next part of the NIST framework. So moving on into the protect phase. Dave, I'll let you take this one here to start off with, but why is a layered approach in cybersecurity really the best course of action for small businesses to take?
Well, the attacks come in layers. Honestly, there are multiple stages to one of these things that we keep hearing about on the news, and there are lots of places where companies like you, who are using multiple different tools and tool sets and techniques, can identify suspicious, in the industry we refer to IOCs, indicators of compromise. It's important to be able to see the entire threat landscape within a network, within an organization, and having visibility at multiple different layers. Putting in a firewall, a lot of companies put in a firewall, even if it's just something they've run down to Best Buy and purchased, right? That's in some cases better than nothing, depending on how hopefully they change the default password at a minimum, right? But so sometimes putting in a firewall gives people a sense like, hey, I did a good thing. And you're like, oh yeah, but the password's password, and everybody knows that. So it's not a great thing. But having a firewall in place, I've had customers tell me, we've got a great firewall, so we're good. And I'm like, you're good at that layer. And I've had other people say, we really focus on protecting at the endpoint and or the server layer, and so we're good. And I'm like, well, okay, you're good at that point. But the way that attacks happen today, they are multi-threaded, they are complex, and they're very comprehensive, and they look for weaknesses, frankly. So it doesn't take but one unprotected system or one unprotected layer even to give the bad guys a toehold in which they can establish, residency in your world, and then traverse the network, manipulate things, steal credentials, migrate around the environment and get to even the protected resources. Now, in some cases, we've seen where bad guys have gotten into endpoint protection solutions, even in our case, in ours, right? If they get to a network admin or somebody who's got credentials and got the passwords, and they log in as you, the person who's got the password, now they've got the keys to the kingdom. They turn off the protection, and then they ransom the whole environment. So having layers allows us to see the entire attack chain as it's, potentially see the, parts of an attack chain as it's happening from the entirety of what they're going to be able to do, from the edge, the network edge, we refer to it, to the endpoints, which are your PCs and servers. So it's really important. It gives you, the good guy, you're showing up at a knife fight with a gun. You're not showing up to a knife fight with a wooden club, or a glove. It doesn't work that way anymore. It gives you a hockey stick. At least you got reach with that. It gives you a better shot of stopping things because you're looking at the entire environment. So kind of a long answer to a short question, but it's important. Layers, layered approach, comprehensive solution, however you want to say it. Really, I try to avoid using the onion analogy because it's a little overdone, but it's crucially important to giving you the best chance of stopping bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Dave. I would just, again, I think having sat in a lot of security meetings, like thinking not only of the multiple layers, but the independence of those layers, right? In the strategic game between kind of attacker and defender, I think what's often underappreciated is the advantages even small organizations have if they create independence across their systems. And if they have those layers, an attacker has to essentially destroy one layer and then try and destroy another independently. That's just that's a challenge, right? For even the most sophisticated attackers. And so if they can do that, then suddenly the strategic advantages return to the defender, which is where it is in most kind of levels of strategic warfare, right? And if you appreciate that, unfortunately, it's sad, but most attackers are financially motivated. So if you make it expensive and difficult for them to deal with you, they're going to go after the slower gazelle. I hate to say that, but there's so many easy targets these days. So make yourself a porcupine, wrapped inside a hedgehog. Anyways.
I always like that. You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the person you're with.
That's why I don't go hiking with my husband.
Yeah, right.
That's why I'm always wearing running shoes on a hike.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
I was going to add on, there's a chat going on about ransomware, and some of the things that I just like to point out and think about is with especially ransomware as a service. If you're watching this, you've never heard of ransomware as a service, you can think about it. You have these developers that are good at building a product, but they don't necessarily want to go out and do the work for it. And then have you ever met a person that's of questionable morals in your life? That's all it takes for somebody is just to be questionable morals to decide to go, I wonder what ransomware as a service is. I'm going to go buy it. And then they'll have to do is go buy an email list. Think about how many of your emails are all your first name, your last name. It's pretty easy to get those lists. And then they just send it out just to see what happens. If you even question morals and trying to feed your family, that's a step that maybe you need to feed your family, and that's a step you're going to do. So that's where you need to talk about, it's not going to, that they're attacking you specifically. It's that as a business owner, you put your heart and your soul and your entire life into developing and building a business, and then they just send you an email and you clicked a button. And so that's the other reason why we talk about these layered approaches and why these things are so important, because if your staff don't know that they shouldn't click an email that says, PS, you need to send me 5 Uber Eats cards or whatever, and they shouldn't click that link, well, that's a layer right there. If they didn't know that and then they click that link, well, that could detrimentally affect your business completely. If your staff don't know that they shouldn't be using password as password, and that's a bad idea, or maybe they don't know that they shouldn't be using the same, even at bare minimum, the same passwords on their social accounts as their business accounts. There was it the beginning of June, there was the biggest password leak in history. Every single one of us, like times 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly what it was, but times 2 or 3, that's how many passwords were leaked on the internet. Facebook has constant leaks, Instagram, like all of them. So if your staff are using the same passwords on social accounts, instantly that's another layer where you can easily be breached and it can affect your business. Like, done.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, ransomware as a service, does, and I think it's amazing. She talked about how you can go on the dark web and buy these. I said it earlier. If you're an aspiring young, hacker, well, I shouldn't say hacker. My guys hate that term because they say it's not hacker, it's criminal, because they're hackers too, but they're good hackers. So we're supposed to say criminals. So if you're an aspiring young criminal and you want to go buy one of these things, not only can you buy a kit on the internet and then you go buy an email list, like she said, and you send it out, but if you suck at it, they actually have 24/7 help desks now, some of these organizations. I mean, these are businesses. Andy mentioned it. The reason they're doing this is because they make a lot of money. Sophos is about $1 billion company. The ransomware market, I think, in next year is something estimated to be around $23 billion worth, right? So they're making more money than we're making. They're doing their sales are higher than ours, and they're raking it in, and they have built businesses that are sophisticated and make it a lot easier for bad guys to target you. Again, especially small business, because people think that they're not a target. So I just think that's amazing that they have help desks.
And I think that's such an important point, that I think so often we think of these very sophisticated, highly technical attacks. And as you guys are pointing out, it is so operationalized, right, in terms of this ransomware as a service or the ready-made phishing kits you can purchase on the dark web, so that anybody with even minimal technical skills can launch these attacks with relative ease. So I think that certainly explains a lot of the explosion that we're seeing in attacks. But then on the flip side too, as you pointed out, a bad password, clicking on a link that we shouldn't. On the flip side, some of the when we're susceptible and falling victim to these attacks, it can sometimes be some of those kind of quote unquote simple human errors as well. And I think hopefully we'll talk more about it, but that's where I think that security awareness training piece and making sure our employees are vigilant and cautious and knowing how to protect the organization is so incredibly important.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, Kim. And I think, talking about these security layers too, it's not just a firewall and endpoint protection and stuff on the computers and on the network. It's also the people, right? It's having, training for your end users. It's phishing testing. It's also having, business processes in place to, work with your staff. It's having a cyber insurance plan for what if scenarios. It's having backup and business continuity, such as Datto has, and monitoring the dark web, like Kim. So I mean, this is really the reason we brought the 4 of you here, is because this is what makes up the layer, right? The security layer. It's not just 1 or 2 products. It really is a suite, an entire suite of products and services to be able to fully provide that layered approach. We had a question I think is kind of related to this layered approach we've been talking about. One of the attendees asked, what's the most effective strategy to protect against the 0-day attacks and vulnerabilities? I don't know who wants to start with that one.
I'll jump in, selfishly, or from a our perspective, we believe that having 24/7 visibility and with a service, or at least a team, doesn't have to be a service, but face it, in small business, medium-sized business, even, I work with companies up to 5,000 employees, and I have very few organizations in my territory of Arizona and Las Vegas is what I cover, that are even up to 5,000 employees that have their own security operations centers. But one of the, having endpoint protection in place, which hopefully all of you do, and having a firewall in place, which hopefully all of you do, that's a great start. But a truly determined adversary is going to get by technology. I mean, if they want into your environment, they will find a way into your environment. Nothing can stop everything. And that's where having the vigilance of a 24/7 operation that monitors for what I mentioned earlier, indicators of compromise, looking for the suspicious activity that takes place before all your PCs get ransomed. I mean, Colonial Pipeline didn't wake up one morning and just everything was ransomed. Well, they did, but they didn't, but it didn't start that morning is my point. It was sudden for them, but the bad guys had been in the environment for quite some time setting this up. They were taking steps, hence the layered approach. They were going, and Andy mentioned it, they go through processes. There's lots of stuff that happens, right? They were doing things that necessarily security experts seeing these processes, files, calls out to the internet, firewall traffic, different things, indications of a potential bad thing coming, either because you've seen it before or because it's just suspicious and you go into threat hunting mode to figure out what's going on. Having that in place enables organizations to see, man, we're going down a path here that's going to lead to something bad, and we're going to cut it off before that bad thing happens. And that for us is that's how we do it. I mean, that's where my part of the panel comes in, right? Product and service area of we have a service that does that for customers and looks for those suspicious activities. I call it fire prevention. Essentially we're looking for lightning strikes and embers that haven't been fully, fires that haven't been fully extinguished, or embers that were left behind, or somebody threw a cigarette out a car window. All of those things are indicators of a potential forest fire. And we're looking for those to prevent the forest fire. So that happens in ransomware attacks. They don't just go hit a key and go, okay, we just ransomed all these computers. There's a lot of stuff they have to do up front. And when you have experts looking for the signals that are indicators of a potential that thing coming, that event coming, you can jump in and prevent them. And that's how we help customers from a product company perspective, right? Product and service that way. So.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And that leads actually perfectly into the next segment of the NIST framework, which is detect, right? I mean, so you can have systems in place to protect. They may or may not protect you against a 0-day. But detect, if you have systems to detect and report on things that look malicious or things that look out of ordinary, that's really where you're going to be able to have some of that increased protection against those 0-day type threats. So with that in mind, with thinking about detection and how do we detect things, how do we make sure we have the right systems in place to detect these breaches? Dave, you talked a little bit about that. Can you talk a little bit more about how do you detect? How do you know that there's something going on?
Well, there's having the firewall and having the endpoint, and things in between, everything in between the edge and the endpoints, and then having eyes on those. Right? There's a tool set in the industry. Many of you have heard about EDR. Many cyber insurance policies today, we're finding out more and more, are requiring EDR or MDR, which EDR stands for endpoint detection and response. And MDR stands for managed detection and response. So think of EDR as the tool set that experts would use to uncover these or find or get visibility to these indicators of compromise, and then use those tools to do something. I think my best example is, you're standing in the knee deep in the ocean in San Diego looking at the beautiful sunset with your kid, and you go, a fin pops up out of the water and you're like, oh my God, a shark. That's my first thought. And my 11-year-old son says, Dad, a dolphin. And I'm like, oh yeah, dolphin. It could be a dolphin. That is an indicator of compromise to me. And EDR is the BC and the scuba suit and the tank and the spear gun that I would have to put on to go under the water to figure out if that's a shark or a dolphin and figure out what I'm going to do about it. And I'm like, I'm not Jacques Cousteau. I don't have that expertise to know the difference. So I'm going to turn it over to somebody else. And that's where MDR comes in. Managed detection and response is the term in the industry, where it's like EDR is the DIY, the do-it-yourself tool set. And MDR is I recognize that it's important to determine if that's a fin or a dolphin or a shark, but I don't have that expertise. So I need somebody to help me do that. And that, Michael, is when you get to detection and the tools, there's the tool set, and then there's the expertise, time. Do you have the time, even if you have the expertise, and inclination to do it yourselves? And in most, like I said, organizations that I talk to, almost none of my customers have their own SOCs. And to build one out, you need multiple people to staff 24/7 to build out the technology and the tools and the people that you need. It's overwhelmingly expensive compared to what you can do when you say, I want a team that does that every day, all day anyway, for a bunch of customers, and take advantage of the that it's already built for you, and implementing something like that. And Michael does that with his business. I mean, iTernal Networks has a lot of customers utilizing a service like that from us, or I think just from us at this point, but to help customers. So.
I mean, we have technical expertise, and it's still easier for us to outsource that layer of it internally for our computers to Sophos, or to provide that service for us. And I'll just point this out. It's interesting, working in technology for as long as I have, most systems, even if they include the capability of detecting things and logging these type of attacks, it's not turned on by default. So I've had small business owners that I've met with, and well, how can we tell if somebody hacked into our account? Like, do you have monitoring systems in place? Do you have logging enabled? Do you have debugging? I mean, and the answer in most cases is no. And so they don't even have any way of detecting that until they wake up one morning and their systems are all encrypted, or whatever attack happened.
The answer in most cases is, what are all those things you just said?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
they have no idea. Yeah. And one of the other things I think that's important with detection, and Kim, this is your area here, is the dark web. A lot of people don't know much about the dark web, right? And it seems like and sounds like a very scary place where all these criminals do things, and it's true. There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on the dark web, and one of those things is credentials, right? A lot of credentials and identity theft information and stuff is out there. And so if a business is monitoring their dark web, or they have a product that reports to them, hey, one of my credit cards, I get this now. I get emails where they're like, hey, we found, a password on the dark web associated with your email account. What should a small business do when that happens, Kim?
Yeah, I think, and it's this perfect time to talk about it, right? We're talking about indicators, and I think we can't lose sight of, the dark web, the data that's found on the dark web can also provide indicators and be that external threat intelligence, right? In terms of exposed data and potentially indicators of active or planned attacks as well. So dark web monitoring, I think, is kind of that critical layer in that security that we talked about. Pretty basic to, again, provide that external threat intelligence. We know that there are some good purposes for the dark web, but as you pointed out, it has just become a rampant marketplace of a lot of criminal activities as well. And chiefly among those, is the buying and selling of stolen credentials. And so we're talking about, employee email addresses and passwords and personally identifiable information that is extremely valuable on the dark web. And so unfortunately, it's just created this marketplace. So, when we see that type of data on the dark web, certainly there are personal implications. If my social security number or date of birth is on the dark web, that of course makes me susceptible to identity theft and things of that nature. But from a business standpoint, if there are employee credentials, employee email addresses, and perhaps passwords and other sensitive information, perhaps a company credit card number or something of that nature on the dark web, that of course can have direct implications to a business as well, and potentially put them at risk, especially when that exposed password is being used, or a variation of that exposed password is being used in other places. And that's where we see kind of that domino effect happen, right? If they, as we pointed out, cyber criminals are automated. They can take that email and password combo and test it against hundreds, if not thousands of sites to see where else they can gain access. So when we see that type of data on the dark web, it tells us things. And I think that's where certainly you and your team can come in to provide the guidance and expertise around that data, what it's telling us, what the indicators are, what needs to happen. But at a bare minimum, if there is an email and password found on the dark web, that user needs to be notified immediately, and they need to change that password and any variation of that password anywhere and everywhere where it's being used. They need to be vigilant with any unusual activity, make sure that they are checking anything that might have some sensitive data related to it, making sure there's no account changes or anything that are inexplicable. And then of course, working with the tech team and making sure, is this an indicator of something bigger? Are there some scans that need to happen? Do we need to check for any potential vulnerabilities or breaches into the network and things of that nature? I think one of the most unfortunate things is, once that data is out there on the dark web, it's out there, right? You can't get it back. And so it's also important. We know that scams will often piggyback off of one another. So once there's information out there, it just kind of raises the threat level, so to speak, even more. And we need to be prepared for even more targeted, even more sophisticated attacks that are going to leverage that exposed data.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. We need to move to the next section. We're running a little short on time. I was going to ask a couple follow-ups, but I want to make sure we get through the other two areas. So the next area of the NIST framework is respond. And Des earlier mentioned, having a disaster recovery plan for your business, which is a critical part to be able to respond and have a plan in place. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Des? What does that include? If a small business owner asks you, like, well, that seems overwhelming, where do I start?
Close your computer, throw it away, and just give up.
Yeah.
You got to talk to the managed service providers. Like, that's the thing, is that it is overwhelming. Each one of these people on this panel have talked about numerous threats, numerous risks. Everything around us is growing so exponentially. And this is where we fall into. So at Datto, we have that business continuity plan. So we used to have conversations about, okay, so I need to back up my computer so I can have a little drive, a little thumb thing, it doesn't matter. And if my computer gets smashed or whatever, I can just back it up, it's fine. You might have files and folders. It's not good enough anymore, because what if, like we were saying, someone in your dark web branches your entire computer and takes everything away from you? Well, now at that point in time, you have two options where you close your computer and give up on your business, and that's it, which most business owners put heart and soul in, do not want to do that. Or if you pay the bad guys, which also is funding the dark web, the worst of the worst, all these horrible people. So you also don't want to do that. This is why having a conversation prior to that. So when these happen, because we've talked about it's not if, it's when. There's so many threats around us. When that happens, that with our solution, you simply roll back to a previous backup. So what essentially happens is everything that you're using, your computer, everything is backed up. And each hour, say, generally speaking, you'll decide as a business working with IT networks, you'll be deciding with them how often you should be backing up your information. If you think about it from like a university professor's experience, if they're grading papers, they want that information backed up at least every hour, because that's a lot of work that they've done. That's a lot of information. They don't want to have to go through that again. So if you got hit with ransomware, right today, when was the last time you backed up your information? And then how quickly can you go back to that point? If you don't have a solution in place where you can say, I can be back up and running in a half an hour, an hour, then how much are you protected? I know businesses say you might have a restaurant. You go down during lunch. Not only are you losing you're down and no one can take any business, but you're also losing all that revenue coming into your business. Now you take that in a bigger scale, in a bigger business. Some of these businesses lose $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 an hour every hour they're down. And that's whether all of these threats that we were just talking about, or whether you're talking about, look at the snowstorm that happened in Texas. A lot of Texas was out for like an entire week or two because they didn't even have any power or anything. So if you don't have a plan in place to protect you when that happens, because it will, one of these things, whether it be these threats or floods or fires or kids and computers, there's just so much coming at us nowadays that you are protected. You can roll back to a previous version and no stress. If something happened, when it does happen, you just took an hour, fixed it, everything's good to go. but knowing what bandwidth that you have on that, that's a very, very important conversation to have, because if you don't know as a business how quickly you can be back up and running in the event of any of these things, then you're not having that educated decision on deciding, okay, is it worth me looking at a business continuity solution? Is it worth me upping my insurance? Is it worth me doing dark web scams? Is it worth me doing all these things? And once you actually go through that process, you know the answer to those and you're making that educated decision. I tried to keep that short. I kind of went on a little bit, sorry.
No, that's good. So there's a business here in town. I don't want to mention their name. We've done some work with them in the past, and their vice president was sharing with me, they had an attack, they had an incident a few years back, and he was telling me about it, and I'm like, man, it sounded pretty bad. It was affecting their servers and their network. And he said, we had a plan in place. So when I got the phone call in the morning that this was happening, I said, well, follow the plan. Right, we have a response plan. And so as he's driving to the office, his team was, disconnecting the network and doing this and following those steps in the plan. And they were down less than a day because they had that plan in place. And if they didn't have a plan and everybody's running around like crazy, and then, the attack spreads or it gets worse or this happens or that happens, when it comes time to recover, how do you recover, right? By then it's, you're running around like crazy. Who knows what, because you don't have a plan. I think it was it Benjamin Franklin that said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Trust me, it's, a lot of the industry experts are saying it's not a matter of if you're attacked, it's a matter of when. And so with that in mind, you got to have a plan of some sort on how you're going to respond, which leads into recover. Desiree talked about a little bit of recovery with the backups and rolling things back. But if the attack's bad enough, you're going to need to get, Andy and his team involved with your cyber insurance plan. And so, Andy, we're going to have Andy on our webinar next month. We're going to talk a lot more about this. But Andy, what does it look like? What would a small business owner expect to have to go through in recovering from a major incident?
Yeah, I think. Unfortunately, I think most people don't appreciate how expensive and how bad it can get for them. They think, it's not a big deal. We're a small business. We can, if we had to buy new computers, we could do that, right? And I think a number of the panelists have pointed out, actually, if your, business was shut for several days, weeks, et cetera. And I think, to touch on some of the things that we've talked about, ransomware, right? What the reason that people end up paying a large ransom is because their next best option, right? And in any negotiation, that's what drives the outcome. What is the next best option? And the attacker knows that your next best option is essentially to be shut for weeks, months, potentially. And so they can ask for a big number, right? So an incident, looks, if they work with us, they literally call our hotline. That hotline gets answered 24/7 by a law firm. Then the law firm gets engaged. You always start with a law firm, because then you're under attorney-client privilege, because unfortunately you need to, if you're going to deal with potential regulatory fines and penalties, right? Something that people don't necessarily think about. Oh man, I'm the victim here, and yet I'm also going to potentially get fined by, a credit card company for PCI or healthcare organizations with HIPAA. I mean, it's sort of like piling on is what it feels like, I think, for a lot of organizations. Then they start to work with an incident response firm. Some specialty firms get involved, and the details of that, are unique, right? Forensics matters. You don't necessarily want to be shutting down and turning off and unplugging computers right away, because now you just destroyed all the evidence, right? So there's kind of some of these fun things, and we'll go through next month. Also, we do quite regularly kind of mock incidents. So I'd have people visit our website, sign up. We have, dummy companies. We walk through what it looks like, right? Then you start to deal with, okay, how do you recover? How do you get those systems back up? And to echo a lot of what people have said, I think we spend an inordinate amount of time, and we should, thinking about preventing these incidents. We often spend so little time thinking about, okay, what actually looks like if this happens, right? And it's pretty simple. To take a Friday morning, block out an hour and say, nobody touch a single electronic device, and then see how your business operates, right? It's going to take you about 5 minutes to figure out it's not going to operate well, and to understand if you can't touch any of these devices, how would you go do that? Would you drive home and use your your significant other's computers, right? Or would you go to the library? Like all those systems. And almost if you just spent the rest of that hour figuring out how to do things, you'd be in a pretty good place, right? To not focus on like every single detail but really what's key to the business, what will keep the doors open, what will keep dollars flowing, and having that plan in place. And out of those incidents, our thing next week, you walk away from that call with a couple page incident response plan, a couple page business impact assessment, highly prioritized. So anyways, I'm not sure that answered your questions, but it's unique, but not to each individual organization, but it follows a certain set of steps, and making sure that you've planned for them and have experts who've dealt with this before is very, very helpful, right?
Yeah. And a lot of what you just said, Andy, really ties right into the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose of that, is to give you this framework to start the conversation within your organization, right? Where are our risks? How do we protect? How do we, detect? How do we respond? How do we recover, right? I mean, asking those questions, it does not have to be a 100-page document, right? It's just start somewhere, develop some policies and some procedures, make sure that you're identifying those risks and getting some systems in place, and work with trusted advisors such as, all of these vendors here. We are more than happy to, consult with you and assist you in implementing any of these products and in implementing the cybersecurity framework within your organization. We're coming close on the end of our hour. I know we've got to announce the winner of our gift card raffle. Charles, I'll go ahead and hand things over to you for that.
Sure, absolutely. So I appreciate everyone participating in the chat. I'm liking the conversation that we're having there. So today's raffle winner is Dave Share. We will be reaching out to you, by the way, via email, so that you can receive your raffle prize. It looks like we are pretty close to ending this within an hour. So first, once again, I want to thank everyone here for joining us, including our panelists. Everyone who's a part of the meeting today will receive an email for a follow-up consultation, as well as a link to a video recording of today's discussion panel. If you have any further questions about our partners, or want advice about implementing a cybersecurity or risk management solution, disaster recovery solution, follow the link in the email that we provide to you, that we're going to send to you, and we can go ahead and book a strategy session and talk a little bit more. Next month, we're going to be meeting again, and we will be discussing what happens after a cyber attack. Right? So we do hope that you guys are able to come back and join us for that. So that's everything. Thank you, everyone, and I do appreciate everyone being here today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.